I was very fortunate to be introduced by Neil to Kathy Basterfield, and she and I had a conversation here about the issue of how low literacy amongst the population interferes with their exercise of their right to information. Information is a human right, a civil right. It's acknowledged as an international norm, and it is confirmed in a UNESCO, in a United Nations Convention on Human and Political Rights. And in Article 19, they set out the basis of those. The legal decisions that have been made and the further regulations that have been established internationally confirm that, in fact, the right to information and the right to access to information includes the obligation on the government to deliver it in a format that is suitable for the individual's use and in a language that is clear and understandable. So we are trying to encourage people to raise this argument and take it further through the courts and in general in raising it to the populace as a right that they have to demand plain language as their human right. Well, the Plain Language Association International began as the Plain Language Network in 1993, and the immediate background to it was that Dr. Robert Eagleson had toured Canada, and myself, I didn't get to attend any of his sessions, but I read a report, and I was able to immediately put it to work on the work that I was doing. Shortly after that, our Continuing Legal Education Society formed Plain Language Projects, which I began to work with, and attended a conference in Ottawa, Canada, organized by the Plain Language Center there. And they had gathered about 200 people interested in plain language and gave us various useful sessions. And at the conclusion, asked the question, what should be done next? And in my naivete, I thought they really wanted to know what should be done next. And I suggested that those of us who were there should stay in contact with one another. We should associate and begin able to share and support one another. The real reason for the question was, where should the government money go next? And that was a problem that we saw at the provincial level and nationally, and we observed in other countries. The problem that the government was determining the agenda by what they funded, and that the money and the institutions they established would come and go with the waves of politics, and whenever a new government would come in, they would strike everything that had been done before, and all the resources and the learning and the institutions would disappear. So no one actually responded at that time to the idea that we should associate. But 2 years later, a woman called me who I didn't know and said she was calling in regards to my proposal there. So we met and had lunch, and she said she would like to know what could we do next to begin to form an international association of plain language advocates. So I said, well, what we do next is I declare this the first meeting of the Plain Language Network. We are the first 2 members, and we will recruit one by one and build a network. And so we did. Now, there were people who thought I was quite arrogant to do this, and they decided they would go through the formal incorporation of a society, which was called the Plain Language Society in British Columbia. And they struggled very hard to maintain a program and activity there for 2 years, at which point it fizzled out, because the critical mass didn't exist to support that kind of structure. And after about 2 years, they asked for a volunteer to write the dissolution papers, and I, of course, volunteered to dissolve them. And we continued to try to recruit. We organized, this other woman was Kate Harrison, who had been a plain language consultant for 10 years at that time. And she and I organized a conference in Calgary, and one 2 years later in, the first congress was in Winnipeg, and the next was in Calgary. And our purpose for those was to organize an association that was independent, that was self-sustaining, that was voluntary, and that would provide mutual aid and support to those of us who were working in plain language. We did have a membership meeting every 2 years, and our mandate was renewed so that we could carry on. And Kate and I were the coordinators. For 7 years, we babysat the association and built it, set up the website and the first listserv that we had. I had been publishing an international newsletter on plain language for a while, and it continued to support the association. And in in Houston in 2000, we said to the members, now if you value what's been built over 7 years, you have to step forward and take over. Because I had children in college that I had to make some money to put through college, and I could no longer be the sole, at that point, coordinator of the association. So many people did step forward and keep it alive, and they have built, since then, the critical mass necessary to actually go through the formal incorporation processes, which they did this year. And I wish everyone well who is doing that as I retire from the field. And I just wanted to bring back to mind that the idea behind the association was to have an independent, self-sustaining organization for mutual aid and support in which meritocracy prevailed, that one was acknowledged and rewarded for one's service and accomplishment, and not based on the government anointing experts or academia anointing stars, but that everyone is equal within the association. And this in particular meant that women should play an active role. And I'm glad to see that women are still very involved in building the association and as directors, and I'd like to encourage them to continue to make sure they do that, and that the principles that were behind the founding of the association are still guiding its activity.